Hello, everyone, and welcome to Proline. I'm John Cranton in Las Vegas, joined by world champion handicapper Jim Feist. We're also going to be joined by Jeff Sott of Las Vegas Sports Services, our man on the street. But we're going to get into some Sweet 16 or some Final Four action. We're going to look back at the Elite Eight and Sweet 16. But first, Jim Feist, you really have had a across-the-board winning week in all sports, really. Starting Friday, you had a big play on Louisville. I know they had a big lead, didn't quite get there. The next day, Saturday, you went 3-1 with your college basketball plays. You had a platinum high roller winner on Wichita State. Sunday, you went 2-1 in college hoops. Another high roller platinum winner with Duke Louisville over the total. That was the same day you went 3-0 in the NHL. And then Monday, the first full day of baseball, a perfect 4-0 day. I know you're not going to let anybody borrow your crystal ball, but how can folks get on board a hot handicap?
Well, it's been a lot of fun. You know, this college basketball season, John, I have to recap that a little bit. It's, you know, we had some rough times early, probably the slowest October, November for us, and even into December, but then it started to roll for us, and it's been rolling, and we expect to turn up these last few games in the also in the NIT, the CBI, CIT, and the NCAA Final Four, and the big game on Monday. So we have a lot of things going on, but let's start with Thursday. I have a $5 parlay. That's right, in the NBA and baseball, $5, and included in those two games is a $500 play. This is a huge play. You get two big games, NBA and baseball, including the $500 play. $5, just call 1-866-841-1655. And when you do call, make sure you ask about my 5-play Friday countdown. So it's $5 for Thursday. That's the parlay, baseball and NBA, including that $500 game in there. It's only $5, so I don't know why you wouldn't call for that. It's 1-866-841-1655, and I have a 5-play Friday countdown that you need to ask about.
Okay, very good. All right, before we get into the Final Four, let's take a look back at some of the action that happened this past weekend. Courtesy of Cantor Gaming, we have a list of the teams that were projected to win the tourney. This is before any of the March Madness happened. You can see Indiana and Louisville at 4-1 and 8-1, Syracuse with 10-1, and Michigan at 12-1. And, of course, that big long shot Cinderella Wichita State at 150-1. There's your four that are left standing. Jim, what are some of your observations on the road to get here?
Well, first of all, the biggest problem that bettors and handicappers, myself included, is to try to determine how strong a conference is compared to another conference. And I bring up an analogy from myself and my own background in another sport, which was pool playing. I was a pretty good pool player, and in my region, I was actually the best pool player, won all the tournaments, any cash games. It was pretty dominant. And everybody thought I was pretty good, and I went off I won the junior state championship, and then, you know, everybody thought I was going to be really good on a national level. Well, let's assume that was my little conference. So I was highly rated in that conference. And because my rating was pretty high, the whole conference got rated high. This is kind of an analogy to point out where the difficulty comes in for us handicappers when we're dealing with basketball conferences. And this happens in football too. Well, I went off and played some national tournaments around LA and Davenport, Iowa, and Florida. And, you know, although I won some matches, I was no match for the biggest and best players on an everyday basis. And it just showed that even though I was the best in my little area, I was no match for the big guys. Well, you look at some of these teams, and I know all year long we've been saying the Big Dozen, or the Big Ten, as they used to call it, was the best conference. And a lot of people thought the Mountain West was really good, and the Big East was really good. Well, as it turned out, the Mountain West was absolutely terrible when it came to competing on a national level. So they're highly overrated, as a lot of them were. And we got a little bit of power out of the Pac-10. They did better than people expected. So bottom line is, nobody really knows how these teams will do when they get out of their own conference. They're not familiar with the courts. They're not familiar with the same hotels they have to stay in. They're not familiar with the same players. They're playing on a national level against different coaching, different styles on different courts than they've been before. And the better players generally step up better. But this year, and that has to be the case. And we look at who we have left. We only have one team from a minor conference, and that's Wichita. And they weren't even the best team during the year in that conference. Creighton was the best team, and they got smothered by Duke. So it comes right down to it. The best athletes go to the bigger schools in the best conferences, and that's generally the case. The problem is, when you're using power ratings of one conference against another, it's a fallacy. It doesn't work. And we have to find a better way. And the way to, in my case, the way to break that down is to just look at how they do against the best teams they play. Their conference games mean absolutely nothing. It's how they play against, if they're always playing 70 rated teams and occasionally they play an 80 or a 90, that's more indicative of who they are rather than blowing out teams at a lower level. You take these teams that blow out teams at a lower level and then step up and can't really play, that doesn't give you any indication whatsoever. When Florida beats, XYZ State by 40, it means absolutely nothing. So that's one of the issues that we've had. But it's been a highly profitable set of tournaments, the smaller tournaments and the NCAA. When you look back at Syracuse, they opened against Montana. That's a nothing school out of a very weak conference. They beat them by 1,000. They beat Cal. I don't think they covered that game, but they did beat them. Cal actually played a little bit better. Actually, then a lot of people thought they would. Indiana, number one team in the country several times this year. They were ranked number one in the country, and they beat them, and then he beat Marquette. Michigan, the team that this is interesting. Syracuse opened a 1-point favorite. That was the first line I saw. And within 30 minutes, everybody had Michigan 2.5. So a lot of early money came in. Either that was a bad opening line or a lot of money, early money was waiting for Michigan to come up on the board so they could hammer them. I don't think that line is going to climb. I think it's going to come back to near even, maybe 1 point. There's a lot of money for this team, these two teams. Both sides are going to get Michigan beat San Diego State, which came out of the Mountain West, not a very good school, good school, decent team, not a good conference. Virginia Commonwealth, good, kind of a disruptive defense like Louisville plays, but not a strong conference, okay conference, not terrible. But that day the 3-point shot killed them. They just couldn't hit anything. And of course I would guess, Rob from somebody else that said this, that's the most fickle statistic because you're shooting bombs, and if you have a bad day with that, you're going to get murdered. They were way down to Kansas. Kansas gave it up. They choked, and they came back and won the game in overtime. Then they hammered Florida. Florida just didn't show up. And Florida's one of those schools that plays in a very weak conference. The Southeast is not that strong, and they beat up on some teams that they should beat up on. They weren't that strong, and Michigan handled them. Michigan has some power. Their guard play is very strong. They're going up against a Syracuse squad that plays very good defense with that zone. You go to Wichita, this is the underdog I think that they were ranked a little low or seeded a little low coming in, but I understand, Creighton did win the conference. Wichita got in there. They beat Pittsburgh, pretty good lineup of teams they beat. They beat Pittsburgh. Then they beat the number 1 seed, Gonzaga. They beat LaSalle, who was kind of a dark horse. They had a play-in situation. Then they beat Ohio State. They choked quite a bit, just like, Kansas did, against Ohio State. And they were playing not to lose, and they almost did lose. But they did get by that. Now they're going to play the monster of the tournament, Louisville, who played AT&T, which is a nothing. They played a conference, I should say a Mountain West Conference team in CSU, which is a very good rebounding team, very well-schooled team. Surprisingly, I thought they were better than a lot of the Mountain West teams, but they did show up pretty well in the tournament. Then they beat Oregon. which was a Pac-12 team, and then of course they hammered Duke. That was a close game, 42-42, and then the young man got hurt, which is a terrible accident, and Louisville just got inspired and just blew Duke off the court. Louisville opened up 10, went to 10.5. I see 11s, and that's a lot of points for a Final Four. But Louisville, if they put the pressure on you and you can't handle the pressure, you're going to get killed. And that's what happened kind of with Michigan against Ohio State when they started to choke at the end of that game. And Ohio State put the pressure on. They blew a 20-point lead, got down to 3, and they were fortunate to hit a couple of bombs to hold themselves together and win that game. These are going to be exciting basketball games. This is what you want in the Final Four. Any one of these teams could win it all. Obviously, Louisville's the favorite, and Michigan is a small favorite over Syracuse, so they'd be the second favorite to play in the final game. The Dogs can cover these games. There's no shoe in here, but Louisville is the strongest club.
Okay, well, before we get to our next segment, let's check in with our man on the street, Jeff Sod of Las Vegas Sports Services. He's got a free NBA play going this week, and Jeff hit his NBA total of the year on March 22nd. That was the Blazers-Hawks under the total. Last week he hit his tournament game of the year. That was Syracuse, and this weekend, Final Four action, he has his college basketball tourney total of the year. Jeff, take it away.
I have a free NBA play going on Friday, but first baseball season is here, and LVSS has a video special only, a full week of baseball and basketball for $10, and it will include my tourney total of the year. Plays every day in 3 different sports to build your bankroll. Call LVSS at 1-866-575-8916. Your free play is Friday in the NBA as Dallas Mavericks head to Sacramento. The Kings have plenty of offensive punch behind Tariq Evans, 10th in the NBA in scoring. They're not a good road team, but play much better at home, 4-1 against the spread against the Western Conference, including a 116-101 rout of the Clippers on this court. This is the 3rd straight home game for the rest of Sacramento, and they face a tired Dallas team in the second of a back-to-back spot after huffing and puffing at Denver Thursday night. It's also a 3rd straight road game for the Mavericks, an aging team ranked 27th in points allowed. Play the Kings on Friday. Once again, get a week of baseball and basketball for only $10 that will include my tourney total of the year. Plays every day, 3 different sports. Build your bankroll. Only $10. Call LVSS at 1-866-575-8916.
Okay. This Wichita State Louisville game, everybody knows about Louisville and their big front court. The concern for me, though, with Wichita is how they're going to match up in the front court. I mean, it was kind of a weak bracket, depending on what you think about Pitt and number 1 Gonzaga. But here's the thing: this Wichita State front court, pair of guys who are 6'8" and Cleanthony Early and Carl Hall, a junior and a senior, and they played Creighton over the last couple months. They had 2 games against Creighton. Didn't turn the ball over, 5 turnovers and 9 turnovers, but they did lose both those games. You go back early in the year, they went to Tennessee of the SEC, turned it over 16 times in a loss, and that's a concern against a Louisville team that is just so hectic and attacking with the press. And take a look at what happened last year. This Wichita State team was very good, 27-4. They made it as a number 5 seed into the big dance. Well, they didn't win a game. They lost to VCU in that first game, a number 12 seeded VCU team. 62-59, they shot just 38% and turned it over 12 times. And early last year, they had their one big step-up game against Alabama. At the time, Bama was ranked number 15th in the nation. The game was played on a neutral court in Puerto Rico. And Wichita State lost 70-60. They only shot 34%, and Alabama blocked a tournament record 14 shots, and Wichita had 18 turnovers. So, Jim, when I look at something like that, I wonder if this Louisville team, which is bigger and better defensively than those Alabama teams, they could have a very difficult matchup time for them.
Well, John, I can't argue with Wichita's strength this year has been their offensive rebound. And if they can get some offensive rebounds, and I understand the problems that you pointed out, but if they can get some offensive rebounds, they end up getting some cheap baskets. And that's, Louisville plays such a chaotic game. It creates a lot of problems for the other team, but it also creates some problems for themselves because, when they're playing like that, they do leave some openings. They're not blocking out as well, et cetera, et cetera. But Wichita's up against it here. You're talking about a 10.5, 11-point underdog. We're obviously, the bookmakers, odds makers, and the players, the bettors, are saying this should and could easily be a blowout. The problem is, can Louisville come down from that big high they had in the second half against Duke? Obviously, they were motivated by the young man that got hurt. The time off and all the other things that go along with it, being a heavy favorite is also a burden to some extent. Wichita knows what they're up against. They have played some good teams. I mean, I don't think Gonzaga was as good as everybody said, but Ohio State was clearly a good team. And they played they played Ohio State, they played Gonzaga, they beat Pitt. LaSalle game, I'm going to just throw out a little bit. They didn't match up well with that. But, they have played some good clubs. And if Louisville comes in a little bit cocky or a little bit flat, then that can happen. They could easily be thinking about the last game. They could be thinking about the matchup against Syracuse and Michigan. And when they're sitting there and they know they're a 10.5, 11-point favorite, they could be a little cocky. So when you're talking about underdogs, I mean, you can go back to these games years ago when North Carolina State, with Jim Valvano won, when Villanova shot 81% against Georgetown, they were a huge underdog. A lot of things can happen when teams are not totally focused on what they're doing. And Wichita's the kind of team that can take advantage of you if that happens.
All right, well, all in all, it's going to be a great weekend. I remember Jeff Sod of Las Vegas Sports Services. He has his tourney total of the year going Saturday. You can get a week worth of baseball and hoops from Jeff for just $10, including that tournament total of the year, 1-866-575-8916. And Jim, how can people get aboard a special rate for your High Roller Platinum releases?
On Thursday, I got two teams. It's a parlay, $5, NBA and baseball. And one of those games, by the way, is a $500 play. So that $500 play is included with the other team, and it's only $5. Make the call. 1-866-841-1655. We're finishing off this college basketball season, and we're starting the NBA playoffs, and we're starting the baseball season, and we started out strong. So make sure you get on board. And when you call, make sure you ask about the 5-Play Friday countdown. We're going to be a winner this weekend. You want to be with us, and you want to be collecting next week.
All right. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Enjoy the games, and good luck.